witnessed in recent years. There has been so much tension in key strategic areas of maritime security, and there's so much rivalry among countries to build up their naval capabilities. And we are seeing that internationally and also in specific regions like the regions that you are focusing on, the Mediterranean and the Middle East, which is of course of great concern to Iran. And today we hope that we can discuss this subject in three smaller, let's say, subdomains. The European and Iranian perspectives, overall perspective on international maritime security, and the perceptions that each side has of the other side's role that they play in maritime security, as well as the key interests and concerns of each side. And in particular, with regards to the Persian Gulf, which is, of course, due to its proximity to Iran, and its strategic importance in energy security, a key issue of today's discussion. So with this short welcome and being happy to see all the colleagues at the FMES, I give the floor to Mr. RAZOUX.
Okay, thank you very much, FATEMEH. May I introduce Jean-François PELLIARD, who is in our meeting room here. He is one of our experts in naval issues and maritime security. He's very experienced on these issues, and he can perhaps introduce very briefly himself to tell you a few words, and then I propose to begin with the first topic and to have an open exchange on the first point. Jean-François.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. So I'm Jean-François PELLIARD. I'm working for the FMES Institute since 4 years, especially on maritime topics, but also on economic topics. Because FMES Institute is working with the SAS region of France to develop defense economy, and we try to give the region good ideas to do that. I'm a former captain in the French Navy, and in the French Navy I've spent many years with training and education affairs, and that's my specific topic, and I'm sorry for my English. So I'm a specialist of training and of human resources. I was a specialist of training and human resources in the Navy, and of course I've an experience about maritime security during my 29 long career in the Navy, 29 years long career on the Navy.
Thank you, Jean-François. FATEMEH, if you want, we could perhaps discuss to begin the first topic, which is the European point of view, and of course the Iranian point of view on general maritime security, international maritime security. We have another expert, Jean-Michel Martinez, who is going to join us in a few minutes. So he will be able perhaps to give you some input and some intents on what is the European, let's say, common defense security, global, generally speaking, and more specifically in the Persian Gulf region. But to begin, I think that I give the floor to Jean-François PELLIARD, and because he would like to exchange with you on certain topics, including on Montego Bay and the International Maritime Convention on the Law of Sea, because we would be very interested to have your own views and your own analysis, for example, on this convention?
Yes, because the UNCLOS is it's a part of maritime security because it defines rules and ways to go to define the maritime limits, maritime frontiers, and to it establishes rules outside and inside those borders. And France signed the convention, the Montego Bay Convention. Iran didn't, but I don't really understand what is the position of Iran about the Montego Bay Convention, and the reason why Iran didn't want to sign it.
First of all, I would like to introduce my colleagues here. Mr. HADIAN, who's going to start his presentation on this issue that you raised, International Convention on the Law of the Sea. And also Mr. DIVSALLAR has joined us from Rome will continue this discussion, and Ms. HOJATI. So Mr. HADIAN, the floor is yours.
Greetings to all. It's a pleasure to know my French colleagues and be with them today here. Well, should I straightly go to the question that was raised regarding the 1982 Convention of High Seas, or should we wait for the presentation to be delivered?
It's up to you. It's up to you, Amir Mohsen. If you want to present quickly your presentation, it's perfectly fine. And if you could also answer at one stage or another why, because frankly for us, it is absolutely, how could I say, it's just that we would like to understand why Iran did not join this convention. And this is not a critique at all, it's just to understand.
I understand. Well, apparently, I do not precisely represent the official line of the Iranian state, but nevertheless, apparently it seems to be the case that according to the 1982 convention, transitional passage is allowed, while according to the 1958 convention, innocence of passage is reiterated. And for Iran, it's the case that innocence of passage benefits it as it controls the Straits of Hormuz. Nevertheless, there's a in-between case that Iran is a signatory but hasn't ratified the convention. I think it has something to do with the United States. Since the United States has not signed the convention and neither ratified it, and it only admits to it as part of customary international law, Iran wants to be in equal terms in dealing with the Americans. I think that's the most probable answer there is available for now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you want, Amir Mohsen, do you want to go further to your own presentation?
Sure, why not? It would be a pleasure, and I would be glad to do so. But I need to share the document, and well, today, do you have the document I've shared?
Yes, Mr.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
Today, in line with the summit we have about the Persian Gulf and the Oman Sea and Arabian Sea, I'm going to discuss Iran and a regional setting. But in order to understand how Iran stands and where does it stand in a regional setting, we should have an analysis of how the Iranian state behaves. One of the possible explanations that why and how the Iranian state behaves as it does can be done through triangular deterrence, which I'm going to discuss later on. Well, a little Iranian naval presence in the Persian Gulf has been since the ancient times, the time of King Xerxes and King Darius, from before Christ. And during the modern times, under the realm of Nader Shah Afshar, Iranians tried to commission a modern-day navy. And as we see in the next picture, we have the swarming IRGC speedboats, and we already know that IRGC is in charge with the security of the Persian Gulf, and the Iranian Army's forward-based ship of Macron. And we know that the Iranian Army is in charge of the Gulf of Oman and Indian Ocean. Well, triangular deterrence is about indirect deterrence, where a weaker power lacking the capability to deter a stronger and important distant power threatens a smaller target. However, I differ with Harkavy and his original idea. Harkavy suggested that it requires WMDs, but apparently in this situation that we have, it doesn't require WMDs, and it can be done by advanced conventional weapons as well. There's a conceptual logic to it, that the coercive strategy can target a base state or wedge between alliances. You know, by coercing an intermediary state, you can create wedges between alliances and thus prevent a unified front against a smaller state. Well, these wedge strategies are about coercive pressure in order to create wedges among allies. And the cost of military engagement with the coercer rises. So we see there's a way to pressure the intermediary state in order to coerce the target state to budge into the demands of the coercer state. And otherwise, the intermediary state or target state, depending on the type of the triangular deterrence, may face punitive action. Why does a state resort to triangular deterrence? Well, there are three logical explanations that why does a state resort to triangular deterrence. One is because it wants to ensure the survival of the state from external threats. As you know, states are rational actors and they act according to their self-interest and according to the accumulation of power. And the basic notion about self-interest is about survival of states. And in this case, the Iranian state. The second reason that could be explained for a resort to triangular deterrence is to intimidate US allies in the region. As I already explained to you, triangular deterrence works through intermediary states that they may have a special relation with the target state, and it may prevent the target state from resorting to specific measures against the initiator. And the third reason can be to deter a US intervention or a broader US intervention in the region. And regarding the notion of coercion, coercion is not something new in international politics. As we already know, coercion is about altering adversary policies without delivering the real threats. And this alterment is not only through military means, it can be done through sanctions. And it changes the choice of states. Once states have a protege in a region, they try to exercise extended deterrence. But once it fails, they resort to dual deterrence. And this can be the case, for example, dual deterrence I can say about Pakistan and India, where the United States wants to deter Pakistan from attacking India and India from attacking Pakistan. And this can be seen in recent years in American conduct in the Middle East. We can see some traces of dual deterrence between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This approach can be seen by the Americans, especially by Democrat administrations, which they want to deter the Saudis from harming Iran in a broader conflict, or the Iranians harming the Saudis and avoid a broad conflict. And in this case, the pivotal role is done through the coercion. Nevertheless, the situation that a coercing state wants to maintain is not necessarily against the status quo. For example, a state can be pro-status quo and adopt these measures of triangular deterrence. So if Iran or any other state possibly resorts to triangular deterrence, it doesn't necessarily mean that Iran is against the status quo. Even it can be, in a sense, an attempt to preserve the status quo. And this conceptualization of indirect coercion is done through actors, threats, and the indirect consequences, the motivations and capabilities and intents that each state have, and the feasibility of the coercion. Perhaps, every coercion must be cheaper than the cost of any alternative path. And usually in international politics, everything is cheaper than war. So coercion is cheaper than war as a consequence. And the intent and the compliance of the coerced state, which comes last. Iranian concerns in the Persian Gulf have historical roots. Prior to the revolution, the Iran-Iraq agreement of 1975, which is still standing and a binding agreement between Iran and Iraq, tried to finalize problems between Iran and Iraq and in a broader context, the Persian Gulf. And in the preamble to this agreement, we see that it is based on the bonds of friendship and good neighborliness. And it tries to expand human relations between peoples based, however, at the same time, maintaining the principles of territorial integrity. And it reiterates the inviolability of frontiers and non-interference in internal affairs. So we have the legal document, the internationally recognized legal document of the Iran-Iraq argument of 1975, which offers also a route to further de-escalation in the region. And in a broader context, there's the 598 United Nations Security Council resolution passed on July 1987, which ended the Iran-Iraq war. Before the adoption of the resolution, Iran demanded that Iraq to be condemned as the aggressor and all foreign navies leave the Persian Gulf. None of these measures were adopted through the text of the resolution. However, later Iraq was condemned as the aggressor after the Second Persian Gulf of 1991. But in Article 8 of this resolution, there's a framework which could be useful for regional and international cooperation. Article 8 requests a broader security consultation between Iraq, Iran, and other states of the region. This must enhance the security and stability of the region, right? And it must be reported to the Security Council through the Secretary General. So the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have the chance to be to be aware of the ongoing process. This includes France, Britain, United Kingdom, United States, China, and Russia. So if we're supposed to develop a regional framework with an international observer status, which could work out for the Persian Gulf, we have 2 international documents available already. One is the Iran-Iraq agreement of 1975, which is based on the bonds of friendship and good neighborliness. And the second can be based on Articles 8, 9, 10 of United Nations Security Council Resolution 598. So, in order to enhance the security and stability of the region, I think that an OSCE platform, something like the OSCE, is possible in a regional context, according to the United Nations Security Council resolution, in which Iran, Iraq, and the littoral states of the Persian Gulf develop a framework which some international relations experts have named as the 6+2, and also include the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council as guarantors or as observers. I think that this framework would work for the Persian Gulf. And another one which has precedence before these recent developments, the Iranian Navy has participated in counter-piracy operations all across the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Persian Gulf, alongside NATO, Russia, China, and India. I think these 2 pathways offer us frameworks for cooperation with Europe in the Persian Gulf. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really useful. I think that you can stop to share your screen and we can go back to the open point. May I introduce Jean-Michel Martinez, who just joined us during your presentation, and he is another of our experts on maritime security. He was recently devoted to various let's say, international missions dealing to be sure to respect some UN resolutions. And he's going, if you want, to answer and to give you the European point of view on the first point, which was what is the European view on international maritime security, and I'm sure you will be it briefly. So, Jean-Michel, I let you to introduce yourself briefly, and then to give your views.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. Good morning, everybody. I am Rear-Admiral retired Jean-Michel Martinez, as Pierre said. I was previously deputy commander of one European Union operation, the operation Iranian. The aim of this operation is to implement the arms embargo of the coast of Libya according to United Nations Security Council resolution. If you have questions on this operation, I will be very happy to answer. But to start, I want to try to give you some answer on your question about European priority about maritime security. First of all, what I want to say is that it is difficult to speak about European priorities. Why? Because Europe is not not a rule. And to give you some explanation on that, I will start to recall what is the European foreign policy. Just few words to remind that the building up of what we know today as the European Common Security and Defense Policy has been a long process. And this process started in 1952 when 6 European states signed a treaty establishing European Defense Community, 1952. But unfortunately, some national parliaments, after this signature, including the French one, reject the ratification of the text, preventing it to coming into force. The reason why they reject this, the ratification is that they see in this text a sort of a loss of sovereignty. So the beginning of the EU construction really started 5 years later in 1957 with the signing of the Treaty of Rome, which created a European Economic Community and established the economic cooperation between European countries. But we are speaking just at that time on European cooperation. It is only in 1982 that the Maastricht Treaty established extend European cooperation with the implementation of a common foreign and security policy. But it just established the principle of this cooperation and without defining precise principle and process to make it a reality. It was necessary to wait 1999 when the member states adopt the principle of security policy that allow EU to conduct crisis management operation. Only 1999. And this principle allow EU to conduct crisis management operation, and effectively, some years later, in 2003, EU effectively conducted its first operation, military operation. It was in Macedonia to enforce the implementation of a peace agreement between the government and the Albanian rebels. Today, the Common Security and Defense Policy of EU is governed by the Treaty of Lisbon, signed in 2009. And this treaty reinforced the scope of EU action, which can intervene for military advice, military assistance, and crisis management operation, like the operation in Libya or the operation in the Horn of Africa are. This treaty defines the principle of the CSDP currently in force, and the main important one is that all decisions are taken by unanimity. And this is the important point when you ask about priority of Europe to keep in mind, is that every decision are taken regarding foreign policy at the unanimity. And it is clear how difficult it is to define common priority for the whole Europe, given this consensus rule we have in the CSDP. But something has changed in the recent months. What has changed is the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine and that the war is back in Europe. And I think that it has dramatically changed the way European countries are seeing the world surrounded her. I want to speak about a second point, which is the strategic compass of European Union, because this compass defines priority for European Union regarding foreign policy, and this compass has been approved by the European by the 27 head of state and government the last 25 of March this year, a couple of months ago. this strategic compass started by the words, the war came back in Europe. And I think that it will change for the future the way the European Union will conduct its foreign policy. And given the situation in Ukraine, it was interesting to see how the debate within the European Union speed up to approve this strategic compass with more strong ambition for the future. This strategic compass define very concrete action for the future. These actions are grouped into 4 baskets. The first basket of action has to do with acting. By acting, the aim for Europe is to be able to act for crisis management and to be able to deploy troops up to 5,000 troops with short notice to do crisis management. Under this basket, acting is also include the European Peace Facility, which is an off budget that Europe can use to do capacity building, for instance, in North Africa, which is a high priority interest area for Europe. The second group of action has to do with secure. By securing, the compass refers to building resilience against threats, including specific threats like cyber threats, but also to be able to address all domain of warfare and to protect European citizens. The third group of action is listed under the title Invest, to enhance the EU defense industry and foster cross-border cooperation between European defense industry. The final group has to do with strengthening partnership. The aim is to strengthen the existing partnership or to conclude new tailored partnership when it's needed. So this is the ambition of European Union for the next 20 years, to be able to conduct all this, to be able to make reality of all this set of action. And in terms of maritime security priority, I think that what is very important for Europe is to ensure all around the world freedom of navigation. Freedom of navigation in all type of international water. It means in IC, but also in exclusive economic zone of different bordering state. It is the case in narrowed in Mediterranean Sea, but it is also the case in Indian Ocean and everywhere.
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. Do you have any questions on this first item to ask us? Yes. Okay, Amir, please ask your question.
Thank you for the informative presentation. About partnerships, I wanted to know that the partnership plans that you mentioned, how are these arrangements made and whether they are made outside the European Union as well or not? And if they are, what are the ongoing partnerships? Thank you.
I will give you some. I will give you an example with the operation. I was part some months ago with Libya. Of course, Europe has several partnerships outside of Europe, and the aim is to have partnership with countries outside of Europe. It depends of the subject, but if we are speaking about maritime security, this partnership have to do with security. For example, with Libya, Europe has a partnership to enhance the capability of the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy to be able to address all the issues they have in their maritime area of responsibility. It includes search and rescue responsibility, but also security issue they have with fishing, for example, or trafficking in their maritime area of responsibility. And to do so, Europe can use several different actions. They can use military operation to do training, to conduct training on the ground or at sea. But they can use also EU representation in the country to conduct some action with the administration of the country in charge of this kind of issue. It is the case in Libya, but it is the case also, for instance, in Somalia, where EU has also representative to do some action with maritime security. I'm sorry, I cannot give you the full list of agreement, but there is roughly 17, if I remember well, 17 different action in progress by EU outside of the border of European Union for security, not only maritime security, but but defense and security issue. But if you are interested, I will find the list and I will pass you the list for Pierre this afternoon.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Do you have another questions, or shall we turn to the second item, which is which are the key maritime areas very important for both for Iran and for Europe? The floor is yours. If not, well, FATEMEH, may I suggest to, except if you want to say something or if you want to add one point, shall we go to the second topic?
Mr. HADIAN has another question.
Okay, because I didn't watch from my screen. So yes, please go. Ask your question.
Regarding these partnerships and broader agreements, because you said these partnerships are subsets of a broader arrangement, as I have understood, and they are 17 agreements in progress, 17 action agreements in progress. I wanted to know, how does the sovereignty of the state, not the European state, the other state, because these agreements are bilateral. I wanted to know, how does the sovereignty of the other state, the status of the sovereignty, affect the details of these agreements? Because in the case of Somalia and Libya, both of these states are lacking central authority and they have deficiencies in their sovereignty. Thank you.
First of all, to conclude this agreement, we need to have the consensus within the European Union member. So this is the first point, because sometimes it is important, because sometimes there is divergent view due to national interest in Europe. So the first step is to reach a consensus within the European Union member to define what we want to do with the country or in the country we intend to act. This is the first point. The second step is to identify a counterpart to negotiate this partnership. And to do so, there is only one way. The way is to deal with the United Nations recognized government. In the case of Libya, if we want to take this example, which is interesting because it is a failing state with a civil war in progress since more than a decade. There is currently two governments in place in Libya, but only one recognized by international community. So European Union discuss and deal with this country, with this government, the agreement we intend to put in place. And regarding the question about the sovereignty of the country, it is clear that all actions are conducted with the approval of this government and under the control of this government with a bilateral structure in place. Europe do nothing in the country or in the territorial water of the country, if we are speaking about maritime security, without the permission of this international community recognized government.
Does it answer to your question, Amir Mohsen?
And if I come back to your point regarding, to my point regarding freedom of navigation, it means that we do nothing into the territorial water, but outside of the territorial water, including the economic exclusive zone, we can act because the freedom of navigation and the freedom of action in this area, in this maritime area, is of interest for Europe.
Does it answer your question, Amir Mohsen?
Merci. Oui.
Okay. FATEMEH, could we switch to the second topic now, if you agree?
Yes, sure. We're waiting for Ms. HOJATI to start her presentation. Ms. HOJATI, floor is yours.
Okay, so perhaps that to begin with, we are going to tell you, both perhaps Jean-Michel and Jean-François, what for Europe, what are the key most, let's say, important maritime areas in terms of, let's say, maritime security. So perhaps, Jean-François,
okay. Thank you.
If you want to begin.
Yes. So Jean-Michel said one point is important. It's the freedom of navigation all around the world. But there are many places, many spaces that are more important than others for the security, for European security. All the spaces where European economic and political interests are engaged are key points for us. And that means especially two main axes. One is the North Atlantic axis, and the second one is the link between Europe and Asia through the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. And of course, the Persian Gulf is important too for energy security. So all the choke points in this way, Gibraltar, Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, Hormuz, Malacca Strait, all the straits are very important for us, especially for economic security. There is perhaps one important point for France. It's specificity of France that we have possessions, we have territories in all oceans. So the logistics of those territories are important too for us. And it's not a question of a global economy, but it's really a question of logistics and economy for those specific territories, those French territories, or in all oceans in the world. So perhaps if there is one key zone, it's really, I believe, but perhaps Jean-Michel has not the same point of view. It's the Mediterranean Sea and northwest of the Indian Ocean, including the Persian Gulf. But the Persian Gulf is very important for us today. For France, we have other sources for energy. We import gas and oil from Norway, for instance. But we don't know, perhaps in 20 or 30 years, the Persian Gulf won't have the same importance for us, depending on the way and the speed will we have to looking for my words, to switch to the electric energy. Yes.
If at that stage, before passing the floor to Jean-Michel Martinez, I would like to just give you an input, and for all the participants, you have to understand that for a lot of European countries, they do not depend too much of the oil and natural gas sent from the Middle East, which means that, I tell it in other words, if we continue to buy oil and natural gas from Middle Eastern countries, this is not because we need this oil and this gas. This is because we want to balance the commercial exchanges flows, which means that, to be simplistic, if you want us to buy or to sell something, we have, or you have in exchange to buy what we produce and what Middle Eastern countries produce, which means mostly oil and natural gas. So you really have to understand, and when I insist on this point, it's for all our Iranian friends, that we do not depend on the oil and natural gas from the region. We continue to buy oil and natural gas to the region because we want to balance the exchange, the commercial exchanges between Europe and this part of the world. This is very important to really have in mind. And now I give the floor to Jean-Michel Martinez, and then we will be very happy to listen your presentation.
I will be brief, and just I will point two very high priority areas. The first one is Mediterranean Sea, and the second one is Hormuz. Mediterranean Sea for two reasons. The first reason is for migration issue, because as you probably know, we have many migration flow coming from Morocco to Spain, coming from Libya to Italy, and coming from Turkey to Greece. And this migration flow has a very huge impact on internal political issue in the European country. So first of all, this is a point of concern. This migration flow through Mediterranean Sea, which means that Europe conduct many action with the country bordering of the southern with country of the southern border of Mediterranean Sea, to address this migration issue. And in Mediterranean Sea, the second concern is regarding the freedom of navigation. And today, this freedom of navigation is or could be contested by two actors. The first and the main one is Russia, that could threat the freedom of navigation, especially in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And the second one is Turkey. Turkey is very active in the eastern part also of Mediterranean Sea, and could threat some European country. So this is a second, and why freedom of navigation is very important in Mediterranean Sea, because the Mediterranean Sea is a way to project sea power to Red Sea, to Indian Ocean, and to Asia and Pacific. And the second spot, second spot very important for Europe is Hormuz, because as Pierre said, this is the strait which is used to import, and which will be used more again in the future for importation of petrol, of gas. And Hormuz, from my point of view, is more important than Bab el-Mandeb, because in case of maritime security concern in Bab el-Mandeb, we can go by Bonne Espérance, by South Africa, to Europe. So we have a way to join Europe in case of blockage of Bab el-Mandeb, but Hormuz is very important for Europe.
And if I may, once again, this is not only linked to energy, this is linked to commercial exchanges, which means that most of people have in mind all the big tankers loaded with crude oil and natural gas going from the Persian Gulf up to Indian Ocean and then to the rest of the world, including Europe. We have in mind also the reverse flow, which means the commercial ships which enter into the Gulf to unload a lot of commercial exchange, a lot of goods which are bought by the local countries, including yours, by the way. Hopefully, when it will be easier to make commercial exchanges. Do you want to make your own presentation on your own side?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the points that you raised. It's absolutely important to keep these points in mind regarding the importance of each of these key strategic areas and the reasons behind their importance, which is not solely confined to energy. I've actually forgot to introduce our colleague, Mr. HADIAN, which is a researcher in the US program. And now we're going to listen to Ms. HOJATI, our researcher in the French program. She also studies French studies. And so Ms. HOJATI, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, very well.
Thank you, Mr. RAZOUX. Thanks to your colleagues, and thanks to my colleagues in Iran-Eurica. It's a pleasure for me being here in this session. I try to present my idea in a short time. My presentation is about Iran's concerns and challenges in Persian Gulf and its perception of Europeans' presence in Persian Gulf. We all know the Persian Gulf as a region with 6 states, with their common and constant problems such as border disputes, fishing issues, and reserve problems, and such as, and etc. We know Persian Gulf, where we have 60% of the world's energy reserves, with about 40% world's energy transmission. And all, probably all we know that Persian Gulf security problems are not regional. It has universal dimensions, and also we know that this region, Persian Gulf, is vital, valuable, and very important asset for Islamic Republic of Iran. But today I want to talk about the Iranian concerns and challenges in a context that I want to say a new complex security environment in Persian Gulf. And I talk about Iranian concerns in this context. And I believe that this context is the result of three consecutive developments or events, including Syria crisis and Iran's tension with Gulf Council cooperation from 2011. The next, United States withdrawal from JCPOA and its launching maximum pressure against Iran, and the last one is Abraham Accords. As I say, I believe these three issues make Persian Gulf an environment with a high-level threats for Iran, not challenges, not concerns. I want to say threats.
Khadijah, sorry to interrupt you. We have not understood the third point. We have well kept your two first points, but the sound was not very good. If you could just repeat the third point. Why?
I say three issues.
Yes.
Yeah, but
did you understand what am I saying?
The first, when you spoke about codes, we didn't understood. We didn't
Okay, I repeat. I say the first one is Syria crisis and tensions between Iran and the first one. The next one was the United States withdrawal from JCPOA in 2018, the number two, and number three was Abraham Accords. That's right, Mr. Razou?
No. What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Abraham Accords.
Okay, I explain. Let me explain.
Abraham agreement. Okay.
Abraham, that's named that is named Abraham Accords peace agreement between Israel and Arab states. Yes, okay, that's right. After the beginning the crisis in Syria, we was a witness a confrontation between Iran and Gulf states, Gulf Arab states in Syria, and the two sides of this confrontation had clear pragmatic and serious manner in Syria. And I believe that the confrontation in Syria front had important and effective serious influence in Persian Gulf. And that was the beginning of curation, the environment that I want to talk about. The second one, in 2018, United States withdrew from JCPOA and launched a maximum pressure campaign of economic sanctions against Islamic Republic of Iran. And after that, short time after that, United States launches international maritime security constructs in Persian Gulf to protect commercial ships in the Gulf. And for this mission, Washington tried to support of Bahrain, homes of United States Fifth Fleet, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. After that, European members launched the same initiative. European lead maritime awareness in the Strait of Hormuz. It is clear what am I saying?
It's clear, it's clear.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And in a short time, Iran found itself surrounded by heavy sanctions and a lot of forces in Persian Gulf for protect navigation, freedom of navigation, and such goals. The last events or last developments that made this environment is Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, as you know, is an agreement between Israel and Arab states, through which are Gulf states, Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. And that was the second, third attack to Islamic Republic of Iran in Persian Gulf. Generally, but in Persian Gulf, it has effective consequences. For example, and anything in Persian Gulf for Iran, I can say Iran's perception from events, developments, and happenings in Persian Gulf after these agreements. And that was a very important point to understand the security environment of Persian Gulf today. For example, during last month, we have a naval force exercises between United States, Israel, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates in Red Sea. Be sure that the consequences of these naval forces exercises would be in Persian Gulf for Iran. And Iran now and Iran have to be equipment to have react to these problems, and all of them, all of these problems, all of these even happenings is are security consequences for Iran in Persian Gulf. I say this, these problems for these results that I want to say. I want to say in new complex security environment in Persian Gulf, Islamic Republic of Iran is not faced with challenges and concerns. Iran is faced with threats, and these threats are serious because and more European presence in the region for Iran is not a protection for freedom of navigation. Iran perceive and conceive this presence as an invasion on its territory. And it's a very important problem. And when Iran conceive this subject, we can accept and we can anticipate that Tehran react to a threat, not to a concern, not to a challenge. I think that at the end, excuse me, at the end, I think that and I emphasize that an important problem here is that the perception of Iran and the European members from maritime security in Persian Gulf is completely different. Because Iran and any mechanism and any constructions that Europeans launch for maritime security in Persian Gulf conceived for Tehran as a threat. All the things that I want to say in this session was this point. And I think that to understand the Iranian actions, the Iranian attitudes during last years, especially after 2018, is based on understand this point that I say, based on that those three elements. I hope to I hope to present my presentation clearly for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khadijah. If I may, before passing you the floor and for exchanges of questions, I would like to rebound on one of your points. We have from Europe and from France, we have the impressions that since Joe Biden has been elected, the general tension, maritime tensions, have switched from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea. And we would be very keen to have your views or the views of other participants on these points, to have explanation, which leads me to my second comment or question. I'm an historian, so as you know, I've very well studied the Iran-Iraq war.
Yes,
so I know by heart all the episodes, including the maritime episode of the Iran-Iraq war. And my impression is that, but I am perhaps wrong, is that now what is important for Iran, and it's quite new, is to extend its naval presences, perhaps not all over the world, but on a lot of high seas, which mean the Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Red Sea, of course, China Sea, which is quite new, which means that instead of looking maritimely, instead of having a sort of focus on the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean or the Gulf of Oman, now Iran has a far more broader view in terms of maritime strategy. And we would be very, very happy and interested to get your points on these two questions. And then we will be able to answer to all your questions.
Yes, that's right. And I think that the other participants in this session, Dr. DIVSALLAR, will be talk about this problem that you said. Thank you.
So who wants to take the floor?
I think our next presenter is Dr. DIVSALLAR, who is also, due to his expertise in maritime security, and he's not, of course, a resident fellow at Iran-Eurica, but we invited him to the session and he kindly accepted. He co-leads Digital Security Initiative at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies University.
And he's a non-resident
institute,
visiting professor of Middle East
Studies. Close your microphone.
And yes, sorry, it was echoed.
Yes.
And he's yes. Sorry, I didn't notice the problem. And he's a visiting professor of Middle Eastern Studies at University of Cattolica in Milan. So we would like him to, if it's possible, to start his presentation, which concerns the question that you raised, Mr. Razoux.
Okay.
Hello and good morning to everyone. Thank you. I just very much enjoyed from a very fruitful discussion that we had. Ms. FARIVAR, if you don't mind, I repeat a bit of my credentials because I think no one heard of it. Actually, well, the point
sorry,
is...
there was a technical problem. Yes, sorry.
In my ex-life, well, I'm kidding, to make the environment a bit more easier. Actually, in my ex-life in Iran, I was a researcher in Defense Industries Training and Research Institute, the Ministry of Defense. Later in Europe, I founded and lead the Regional Security Initiative in European University Institute here in Italy. And now I lead that initiative also with, at the same time, a non-resident scholar in Middle East Institute in Washington, and I'm also a professor in University Cattolica in Milan. Well, a very interesting discussion. I think probably the reason that I jumped in was that part of your very interesting question is dealing with what I will, for a few minutes, will speak. Actually, I will try to a bit elaborate how Iran's, let's say, maritime strategy is shaping, how Iran decides when it comes to the waterways around its territories, and what actually faces the major shifts that Iran has in its decision-making cycle. So I think as an observer, the Iranian strategy in the Persian Gulf in broad and the maritime area in general is two-faced. You have a confrontational phase, which you just recently. This is a very timely meeting because we just recently had this issue of Greece oil tanker. And of course, the Iranian tanker, which was seized by the U.S. And the Greeks, and then by U.S. of course. So one part of Iran's face or behavior is usually on the confrontational side, which actually deals with what you were saying on the freedom of navigation. But on the other side, Iran is also a cooperative actor. I mean, it seeks for cooperation. You had many initiatives by Rouhani president, the former president Rouhani, HOPE initiative, and repeatedly during different, let's say, terms of presidency, including by the Ahmadinejad and by previous Iranian presidents, you had different calls for cooperation on the regional scale, which the Persian Gulf waterways was one of the key points of all these calls for cooperation. So these two phases of Iran's behavior is a kind of interesting thing to study, to see how actually Iran changes its decision, why Iran shifts between these two, let's say, phases, and how it decides to move from confrontation to cooperation or vice versa. Well, before saying my main point, I need to say that how Iranians see the southern flanks and the waterways in the southern flanks is shaped by two forces. First is their historical perception of threat from the south. You know, we had an island invasion of, you said that you're a historian, so you know very well the Portuguese invasion of Hormuz in the 16th century. Then it comes to the 19th century, the British invasion of the southern flanks, Bandar Abbas and part of the Iranian territories because of the dispute which was in Afghanistan over Herat. And then later it continued after the World War II when the coalition forces entered into Iran from the southern route, which was the Persian Gulf route. So in the Iranian mind, there is one basic principle. If you lose the waterways of the Persian Gulf, you will have a direct security threat into the national security level. This is an imperative that is very much well received by the history in Iran's strategic thinking. The second actually force is of the fact that Iran also sees the Persian Gulf as a geopolitical resource of its foreign policy, which is actually used to build and emerge and, let's say, maximize its power. So on one side, when you look at how Iran decides, it's very much forced a kind of a conservatism by the constraints and the limits that it has from these historical perception of threat from the south. From the other side, it's come from the fact that Iran sees the Persian Gulf waters and its maritime strategy as a source of power. So how these two combines together and shapes of the strategy is what I think basically is shaped by the shifts and the dynamics of the threat. So Iran is a very reflexive actor, as I understand it in foreign policy behavior. It's a very reflexive actor. It reflects to the threats that it receives from its security dimension. Security environment. So the level of threat defines how Iran's move between these two phases. So I will try to elaborate more that how this process takes place and what are the major Iran strategy, and basically will shed light on the fact that how the question that you raised on how probably Iran will expand or whether it expands, which I think it will not do that in a meaningful way. The first part of my argument is about we need to know very well what are the Iranian limits. Decision-making process in Iran, when it comes to maritime issues, has at least 4 critical limits and constraints in its mind. First is the fact that I think Iranians are very much concerned about the reality that they are in a sort of a stalemate. You know, there is a strategic dependency to the waterways of the Persian Gulf for the trade for Iran. If for France or for Europe, oil is not a main reason to do the trade with the Middle East, for Iran, 90% of its oil is exported by the Persian Gulf. 55% of all Iranian trade is taking place by the ports in the south. So basically, closing of the Persian Gulf and insecurity in the Persian Gulf basically means a cut of the lifeline of Iranian economy and a kind of a complete stalemate for the function of the state. This is the first limit. The second limit is the reality that the social cultural structure of the Iran's southern provinces are fragile. Basically, they are fragile because of underdevelopment issues, because of the drug trafficking, which we have problems from the Afghanistan and from the Pakistan, and also because of the extremist concerns. So the mixture of the underdevelopment, drugs, and trafficking issues actually, and the threat of the extremism, it makes very much the socio-economic structures surrounding the Iranian coasts in the Persian Gulf very much fragile. And that's the issue that very much makes Iranian policymakers concerned about when they want to, and they want to decide anything about their strategy in the Persian Gulf. The second limit and the second constraint is the fact that, as I think one of the speakers today mentioned, the significance of the waterways in southern part of Iran are declining. In the next 2-3 decades, and partly it's because of Iranians' over securitization of the region of the waterways. Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and the other main exporters of the oil, they all have built new pipelines, and they're all shifting toward the Red Sea as a main export line. So a shift of importance from the Strait of Hormuz to other waterways is what actually limits Iranian, and it's part of their new thinking pattern, that what if that flow of trade and good and oil and whatever you call it moves from that waterways to the other parts. And the fourth and last constraint is the fact that I think anyway, we like it or we don't like it from Iranian perspective, I'm saying with respect to all my Iranian colleagues, the fact is that international coalitions, which French is also an important part of it, and the European coalitions have very much constrained Iran from moving and has limited Iran's freedom of action. Part of the countries that are usually among these coalitions, like for example, up to before the recent tensions a bit with Iran and South Korea, for example, the presence of South Korea and Japan in these coalition forces strategically limit Iran to go into a kind of a collision course with the countries in the Asia that it has a strategic or let's say important relation with them. So these are four factors. When we talk about how Iran decides of its maritime strategy, we need to consider and we need to put it on the table and know that Iranian policymakers are very well aware of them. They have a very good calculus of their own limits, and they know that they cannot go over these limits. That's my first argument. The second, okay, so how Iran builds its strategy, I think at least four main strategies what we can see by looking at Iran's former policies and behaviors in the region, particularly in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz and in the Sea of Oman. First is about the deterrence, which one of my colleagues very well expressed that, and that is about the concept of deterrence. But how Iran sees the concept of deterrence, I think in itself is interesting, because for Iranians, the argument is that, look, Americans made a war in Iraq and Afghanistan. They went to the war unchallenged on the sea. So the sea power of US power projection remained unchallenged. The next war US want to do in the Middle East cannot go that way. So the logic behind is to completely put US or adversary from the Iranian perspective in a situation that cannot have a sea superiority. So the first concept of Iran's actually maritime strategy in its power structure is to create a kind of an area, anti-access area denial strategy that is based on to raise the cost of any power projection by other or third countries in that region. So this A2AD strategy, the target is to link the various domains of the warfare, to link the air superiority to the sea superiority and to land superiority as one concept, and to challenge all of them at the same time. So that's exactly, if you look at Iran's military strategy, you'll realize that Iran is using the missile forces. It has its own strategy on the ground, and it has its own element of power in the sea in order to create this cross-domain impact. So the first logic behind Iranian deterrence concept is to pose to the Americans this cost of a cross-domain operation, to overwhelm US operational cost and to bring it higher than what usually has been the cost that Americans were paying for their wars in the Middle East. The second fact is what I call, we were still talking about the deterrence and how the concept of deterrence is working on the Iranian market. The second is the crisis extension concept. So I think for Iran is important to send the signal that making a war with Iran means making a war with the region. So having a war in the waters of the Persian Gulf cannot go away like the way it went well in the 80s that Iranian navies and the US navies confronted each other with a limited or at least a very constrained regional implications. So this will have a crisis extension function for the region and beyond, which of course we're talking in a very close neighborhood, which is Europe. And the third, still in the concept of deterrence, is the immediate deterrence. So I think both Washington and Tehran are very much aware of the fact that the waters of the Persian Gulf are where they pose their immediate deterrence concept. That means that you have seen very well that probably the Trump administration has a problem with Iran. You see the tensions in the Persian Gulf because that's part of their power projection strategy or show of force and immediate deterrence strategy in order to convey an use of a political signaling. So if you start from a stage of a war to the stage of a political crisis, all these deterrence concept shapes how Iran starts to think about the waterways around the Persian Gulf. The second, however, strategy is not deterrence, is what I call counter-exclusion tool. So part of Iran's look at the waterways around its southern flank is that wants to send a very single message that, look, you cannot have a regional security framework that excludes Iran. So the exclusion of Iran, first of all, has one meaning, means that the destabilization will be a pattern. So you will be insecurity will be a pattern rather than security. That's the main political message behind Iran's strategy in its counter-exclusion tool. The second issue that Iran wants to convey by this strategy is the fact that, look, the US-led security structure, because of its construct, which always exclude Iran, is structurally limited to build security. So that's a message that Iran very well tried to convey amid the crisis in 2019, that this structure that excludes Iran is by nature insecure. So you cannot go with a security format that excludes Iran and expects a long-term, let's say, security in the whole region. So in line with these counter-exclusion, you will see how Iran used the Russian and Chinese factors. So calling for a kind of multilateralization of the Persian Gulf water, which is always a point of sensitive issue for European and Americans, to bring new actors like China and Russia, give them the space to come to the Persian Gulf. You see that, Iran is constantly insisting on having naval drills with China and Russia, which we know very well that militarily has no major importance because it's usually just a very simple practices and not so much deep onto the military cooperations. But from actually political side, it sends this very important message that multilateralization of the Persian Gulf is what Iran will look as a way to challenge its exclusion from the regional security format. And this is the second. The third, actually, part of Iran's strategy is what I call brinksmanship, or what we call usually international security brinksmanship strategy, which is actually not deterrence. It's not a counter-exclusion tool. It's a brinkmanship. It means that Iran builds the escalation ladder in order to receive a political benefit from the creation of escalation ladder. That very much relies on the fact that the actor thinks that by raising the cost or raising the escalation, it will probably have more political benefits. And that is where you see Iran's movement, Iran's reaction to the maximum pressure, where we had some insecurities in 2019 and 2020. And that was a signaling to the fact that, look, that the crisis could be more than this. So the crisis can go up until there is a political concession. So this actually concept of brinkmanship policy, which I see them differently, because you need to see that, you need to realize that they are working for Iranians in different stages of the crisis with the US. So the deterrence is where we are talking about the active stage of a war. and we are probably talking about a prevention of an active stage of a war. Beyond that, there is no more deterrence. Brinkmanship is where the objective is about the political opportunity that the country wants to make, which we see that during the 2019 and 2020. So that's exactly very important politically, because it sends the message that Iran wants, because of the limits that I said, Iran also needs stability. So Iran does not look for a complete disorder or complete insecurity in the region, because it will work against itself primarily. But it do the escalation in order to open up the political space for the concession. So that's where I think Iran is very much focused when we talk about the Persian Gulf. So these three, I try to finish my point. These four power strategies and the number of limits that I said, I think will very much lead us to the conclusion that, you know, Iran's strategy, maritime strategy, will remain focused in the Persian Gulf. In its main effort will remain focused, because that's where probably, of course, I agree with the fact that Iran has an eye on the Red Sea because of the shift of this importance of the things to the Red Sea, and that's why it has attempted to build alliances or connections with the North, with the Sahel area and the North Africa. But I think the limitations of Iran over the capacity limitations to project power in the Red Sea is still very high. So that brings Iran very rationally to the conclusion that it should remain into the area that has an advantage, which is the Persian Gulf and probably the Sea of the Gulf of Oman and the Sea of Oman. That's saying that, I think the key element that basically defines Iran's strategy in the Persian Gulf and its maritime strategy in a bigger term is how the dynamic of the threat moves on. And that's basically what we are talking about, is a US-Iran relation. That's the main factor that shapes the format of the future of Iran's naval strategy. That's the key element that actually builds how Iran probably will adjust itself with new realities of the larger seas, which I think, as was you mentioned, in the Indian Ocean, which is partly show of a power, but I don't see them so much in none of these four strategies that I said. And I stop here. I forgot one of my points, but I will bring back in the discussion when it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ABDOLRASOOL. Your presentation was absolutely excellent and extremely informative. So thank you so much. Before answering to the question which appear on the screen, which is an excellent question, I would like to, I begin to answer this question, and then I would like to ask myself one question to your presentation, which is, do you think that liquefied natural gas technology will be a game changer in Iranian maritime strategy, which means that you have perfectly told us and explained to us why Iran is facing limits on the extension toward the south of its maritime strategy. Well done, okay. But if tomorrow or the day after, LNG will be the new, let's say, golden issue, it is going to transform everything. And it means that, do you think that it will have an impact on Iranian maritime strategy? So it will be my question. And now I answer on my own to the question which appear on the screen, which is, in recent years, Iran has sought to facilitate Russian-Chinese entry into the Persian Gulf in order to strengthen its relation with Russia and China, as well as to balance US threats in the region. What is our perception? My perception, and then I will give the floor to Jean-François PELLIARD and Jean-Michel Martinez, but my own, let's say, perception is that it is extremely logical. If I would be Iran, I would do probably the same. Then it asks me two points. The first is how to balance Russia and China, because we all know very well that they are in strong rivalry on the global stance. The second question is how to deal with India, because India is a key partner, economical partner, and even political partner for Iran. By the way, for Europe too, and for France too. My own views is that too often we forget to deal with India when India could perhaps play a positive role in easing the tensions between Europe and your country. This is just a point. I think that if you allow the Chinese and the Russian to enter more in the Persian Gulf, you are going to be at odds with India, because of course India has difficult relations with China and very good relations to Russia. So it's going to create a sort of more complex game, not for us, but for Iran. So this is my the answer to the question. And the last element of my answer is that if I were an Iranian, because I hope to understand you quite well, I would be very, how could I say, very embarrassed on the one hand to allow the Russian and the Chinese to counterbalance the US pressure in the region, but on the other hand, to keep safe my own sovereignty of Iranian, which means we just to, let's say, to have an open debate. If, for example, Iran would allow naval facilities to China in Bandar Abbas, or to the Russian Navy and Air Force to Bushehr or other places, it would be very logical on a strategical point of view. But then you will have your own population and political class saying, well, you are selling the sovereignty of Iran to Moscow and to Beijing. So it will be my answer. But on the global stance, it's very logical. So if Pascal wants to say something.
Yes,
Pascal.
Just a word. I'm obliged to leave. It was very interesting to listen to you and the discussion this morning. Thank you very much for all the participants. I just wanted to emphasize what Pierre was saying. I agree completely what he was saying. Today, and we understood perfectly well your points, everybody. You said several times that your main concern, much more than concern, your main threat is the US for you. And my point is that the real issue, not the real issue, it's a real issue. But we have to foresee the future. We are in a changing world, and we see China, we see Russia, China first, rising more and more powerful in the world. And we are already, we have the feeling that we are on the front line with Russia, and China is not very far away from Europe. And you are in Iran, clearly on the front line, in this struggle between the US and China, and Russia is far away from you as well. So you are, I would say, at the core of the typhoon, and it's not a very comfortable situation. I guess if I were an Iranian, I would be a lot of concern with that. And playing with tigers is always a dangerous game. And if you want to survive, you must be clever and sure that you are clever. And we try in France and to make Europe a little bit more clever, and we try to be clever to survive in this dangerous world in the future. I think that in 10 years or 15 years time, the threats will be much more complex, and probably the US will not be the only threats Iran is going to face. So I understand perfectly well your policy and the maritime strategy, and it's very articulated and very coherent. And so I'm completely in line with what Pierre was saying. At the same time, and that's a question much more than something else. The question is how deal with the present threat and present situation without putting us in the future in a very bad and worse situation. And so how making a strategy which will not prevent us to survive and to develop in the future. It's a point for Europe, how to deal with Russia, which is a threat right now, without preventing us to work with Russia in the future, because we have to work with them. How to deal with China without making them so powerful that we will be completely under their control, and how to deal with the US not completely overwhelmed by them. And I think for Iran, it's exactly the same situation, probably more accurate, but the future will be much more complex in my view. So it was just to give that point. And once again, thank you very much for all your participants. It was very important and very interesting. I hope and we will be able to organize other webinars on maybe more other specific points, because the exchange of perspective was very, very interesting. And I think we can learn a lot from each other. Thank you very much. And I listen a little bit the answer, and then I will leave without any words because I have to leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal, and speak to you soon. Abdolrasool, just to continue.
Sure.
I would be there, and we would be very interested to get your point on LNG, liquefied natural gas, and is it a game changer for you or not?
Well, look, I think thank you so much also to Pascal and the rest of the team for participating. I know he was busy for sure. So my point is that, look, Iran's strategy in the Persian Gulf basically is not driven by its economical or political economical factors. It is not driven by ideology, for sure. It is not driven by economy too. So that's the key factor. So the liquid gas might change the only dimension that probably might change is where we talk about the importance of the Strait and the Persian Gulf in broad term by the other actors, particularly by the GCC countries that they may change their logistical routes. But beyond that, for how Iran decides about its military strategy or its southern flanks strategy, I don't see very much the importance of, at least at this point, a political economy factor. One point that I forgot actually my argument to say was that Iran's strategy in the south has a kind of a political logic at one of its strategy, which is using it as a kind of a socio-economic driver. So seeing, we have the project, the Mokran development project, which Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei very much insisted on that. And it was his personal, basically, perspective to develop the almost 600 kilometers of coastal lines that was part of this program to drive a kind of, to come up with some development plans, some new constructions, new projects that can generate more economic power in the south. But the reality is that, this economic logic and this, let's say, developmental logic, when it comes and faced with the security pattern, this is completely becomes a second priority and very much becomes something that will not be on the table for as a key priority for Iranians. So that's how I would reply to your question, that I think because of the fact that the political economy is a second factor, or basically economy or the industrial patterns are the second factor, the second priority, I don't see so much change in the long term. One more point that maybe I just very briefly would like to say is the fact that look, I think I very much agree with Pascal about the complexity of threat that Iran is facing. Basically, we are seeing it right now. I just a few days ago tweeted something, and that look, Iran is facing with the Turkish rising power, not just in its northern part, but also in the south, based on the recent Turkey and Saudi and Emirati partnership. And then you have the, as my colleague said, Abraham Accord that is completely changing the dynamic. In the pattern of Iran's problem with the Israel, the importance of Persian Gulf will decline. So the sea strategy, or that part that I was saying as A2AD strategy, is working for Americans. It's not working for Israelis. So very much can be used as another colleague was saying, as a pressure tool to the Arab or GCC factors. But the current Iranian sea strategy is not, or maritime strategy, is less forward-looking toward future threats. Probably we will see some adjustments, but at the moment, the very focus and the very attention is forced by the U.S.-Iran dynamic of the tensions, and how that is probably going to be shaped will also tell how Iran will move on toward its maritime strategy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, really. Do you want to ask us other questions before perhaps finishing? Because I see that we have still 6-7 minutes.
Well, I just want to ask one question from you. You said about the French perspective toward the region. So how particularly French as a national level, I'm saying, is looking at the, let's say, the projects that it has or maritime coalitions that it has, and how probably looking possible Iranian inclusion in its maritime operations. I know that very well that it's part of the NATO. There is the considerations of broader US-led military structures, but what is the French position about this inclusion of Iran? Because sometimes we also hear some hardline positions from French military regarding Iranian activities in the Persian Gulf too.
Perhaps that I pass the ball to Jean-Michel.
No, yeah, you pass me the ball, but I am not entitled to in the name of the French government. I don't know what is the French position regarding this inclusion in the future. But what I want to say is to give you more element to well perceive the French presence in the region, because your presentation and the previous one was very interesting, especially regarding the factor that shape Iranian, the way that Iran is seeing its strategy in the Persian Gulf. And I have heard also, and I perfectly understood the threat you can perceive, seeing US presence and seeing European presence in the Hormuz threat. What I want to say is to explain the way Europe and France perceive this military operation, and it is always perceived with a holistic approach. We consider, especially in Europe, that the military solution alone cannot resolve any conflict situation. And military operations are always part of a wider series of action, including humanitarian, economic, and political tracks, and diplomatic tracks. And it is to explain you why there is, for instance, this naval operation in the Strait of Hormuz. In the Strait of Hormuz, we were witness of several attacks, again, merchant vessel, unidentified attack perpetrated by UAVs. So some of them perpetrated by UAVs. And to ensure security, maritime security is not only something to address the threat posed by a state, but it is also to ensure the security of the navigation. And it was the reason why this operation has been launched. to deploy assets to be able to provide maritime security to the merchant traffic sailing into the Strait of Hormuz, and to be able to react in case of maritime incident at sea.
May I just interrupt? Sorry, the one point I would like to say before we go. I think precisely in this moment, which there is the war in Ukraine, the reality is that Europe, I'm myself in Europe, and I work in a European institute. So I'm also very much worried about the fact that, look, there is an incompetency in the European side, the truth is, and that is the fact that Europe is circled by two crises, emerging crises. We have the Ukrainian war already, but what is boiling right now between Iran and US on the JCPOA, which we are seeing it right now in the Greece incidents of the tanker, is a boiling of a new crisis in European southern flanks. I agree that we saw the 2019's attack, which we know very well. I think you know very well, all of us know very well, that the origin of the attack was not based on Iran's single decision or any activity's single decision to start the attack or to start rising the crisis, as I explained, the crisis ladder, because of nothing. It was because of the maximum pressures reaction that the US side was created. So the reality is that the rising tensions between Iran and US will put EU basically and European institutions, European security in a double crisis. So we will have a crisis if the JCPOA fails, and if the crisis goes to the higher level. The prediction is very much simple based on Iranian behavior and also on the US behavior. You need to expect tension in the Persian Gulf. And basically the current missions that French is also part of it, and European states are part of it actually, proved not so much efficient in preventing what the mission was designed for. You know, you have the Greece incident just as a proof that these coalitions, or these missions are have their own limits, because either you need to decide, you're a Marine yourself, and you know that you need to decide either to engage and enter in a collision, which you have a higher crisis, or you let the ship to be arrested or to be taken to the other side. So I'm saying that the ladder of escalation is very much sensitive right now, and that's basically will lead us to a kind of a argument during the last 2 years. I tried to work here in EUI, and that's about the EU strategic autonomy. The EU strategic autonomy, you said about the strategic campus, that's right. But EU strategic autonomy also means the fact that EU should not engage into the crises which are not necessarily part of the EU crisis, but they're constructed probably by the US-Iran crisis. So how to make EU independent from a US-Iran crisis is particularly on the sea, where we need a diplomacy on the European side, where we need probably to push more on European action in order to resolve the JCPOA as a thing that is not moving on either side. I mean, I know that Enrique Mora is active on that, but we know very well that also Europeans didn't do enough. They become irrelevant for Iranians. And that's one reality that we need also to conceive, because European missions were not deterrent for Iranian. You see the Greece tanker is already arrested. Europe become lost of its power instruments, which was economy. So Europe basically become a geopolitical irrelevant when it comes to Iran. And even right now, when you see the EU Gulf strategic concept that was just last week published, you again see this trend. You again see this fact that the EU is pushing to the Gulf on the GCC side and keep itself more as an irrelevant actor when it comes to the Iranian side. And this closes the possibility of a crisis resolution. I think that's particularly at this moment very much important. And just last word, I know I talked so much. The last point is that I put because what I discussed was already published last year as an article that we published. So I just put the link here in the chat. So if you're interested to know more about Iranian strategy, you can just download it and see.
Thank you very much, ABDOLRASOOL. For sure, we are going to read it. Just to answer to your points, and I speak, of course, on my purely personal behalf. My intuition, if you want, is that for Europe, Iran or the Persian Gulf is not the hottest and the priority. Priority number one is Ukraine. Priority number two, I would say, is North Africa. Priority number three is China. Why? Because the exchanges between Europe and China are so huge that all Europeans have an eye permanently focused on Beijing and on Taiwan and on the South China Sea. So it means that I fully agree, and we have well understood your points. But my intuition is that most Europeans think that, well, at least we have 2 years, 2 years and a half, which means that as long as Joe Biden is in power, our intuition is that Joe Biden has a lot of business on his plate with China and Russia and Ukraine, not to open a new front in the Persian Gulf. If in 2 years and a half another president arrives in Washington, it could be a different story. Like, let's say that the general perception in Europe is that we have 2 years to settle the Ukrainian crisis and to deter economically China, and then we will see. It is clearly my own personal answer.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to add one point. No. Okay. So FATEMEH, I give you the floor if you want to close this webinar, because we are now out of time. But on our perspective, it has been extremely fruitful. We really, really thank you very much for organizing and attracting all these experts. And we really hope to be able to continue another time on another topic and to develop this academic, let's say, cooperation between Iran-Eurica and FMES Institute on our side. So thank you again, and the floor is yours to finish if you want.
Thank you, Mr. Razo, and thanks to all the presenters and participants who kindly joined us today and listened to the talks, which were really, I agree, really fruitful and informative on both sides from both institutes. And once again, I would like to hope that we would continue working together, holding similar seminars and webinars, in future, perhaps seminars in presence, and look forward to further collaborations. Thank you very much, and wish you a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you to everyone. Have a good day.